My son's wife handed me a binder the first time I asked to babysit my granddaughter alone. 3-ring, navy blue, with a tab divider system and a printed cover page that said, Caregiver Protocol, Emery V. Emery was 4. I had driven up from Charlotte to their house in Asheville with a small bag of those soft cinnamon cookies my wife used to make, the recipe handwritten on an index card I'd kept in a kitchen drawer for 38 years. I sat at their kitchen island and turned pages. Bedtime routine. Approved snacks. Words not to use in front of her. Topics off limits. A laminated page in the back with a list of relatives, each one labeled approved contact, or limited contact, or no contact. My name had a little asterisk next to it. The asterisk meant see notes. The notes were on page 17. I want to tell you my name is Harlan Pickering. I'm 62. I worked 34 years as a structural inspector for the Department of Transportation in North Carolina, signing off on bridges and overpasses and the kinds of things people drive over every day without ever once thinking about who decided they were safe. My wife Marlene died of a stroke 3 winters ago, 41 years married. She went to bed one Tuesday with a headache and didn't wake up Wednesday. I'm still not entirely sure what to do with the second pillow. We had one son. His name is Theo. He's always gone by Theo. And he's 36 now, a software developer at a healthcare startup. He met his wife, whose name is Adeline, at a friend's wedding in Raleigh about 8 years ago. Marlene liked her. Marlene liked everyone. But she liked Adeline carefully. The way you like a knife you respect. She told me once after a Thanksgiving dinner, she watches Theo when he talks. Not the way I watch you. Different. I asked her what she meant. She said, I'll tell you in 10 years. She didn't get 10 years. She got 2 more before the stroke. When Emery was born, Marlene was already sick. Not the stroke yet, but the high blood pressure that her doctor kept warning her about, the swelling in her ankles she pretended not to notice. She held Emery in the hospital the day she came home, and I have a photograph of that moment on my refrigerator. Marlene in the rocking chair we kept in the living room, Emery wrapped in a yellow blanket, Marlene's mouth open in a quiet laugh. Emery was 4 months old when Marlene died. I drove to Asheville for the funeral arrangements with a casserole dish in the passenger seat because I didn't know what else to bring. Theo cried. Adeline organized. Things between Adeline and me were always polite. I am a polite man. I don't push. I told myself for a long time that what I felt around her was just the natural strangeness of a father-in-law who didn't know how to talk to a woman half his age about anything that mattered. I gave them space. I called before I drove up. I sent birthday cards on time when they bought the house in Asheville, the 2-story Craftsman on a tree lime street near the Biltmore estate. I gave them $80,000 from the life insurance Marlene had left me. I wrote a letter to go with the check. I told them it was for Emery's room and the down payment and whatever was left after that. I said in the letter that Marlene would have wanted them to have it. I didn't ask for anything in return. I didn't keep a copy of the letter. What I didn't understand then was that in some marriages, money doesn't arrive as a gift. It arrives as a weight. And the person who receives it begins, almost immediately, to figure out what it costs the giver and what they can therefore charge the giver in return. The visits started getting strange about a year after Marlene's funeral. Small things. I'd drive up on a Saturday morning, 3.5 hours from Charlotte, and Adeline would meet me at the door with that smile she had, the one that looked like a smile in a photograph, fixed, and not quite reaching the eyes, and tell me Emery was napping, that I should come back in 2 hours. I'd sit in my car and drive to a diner on the next street and order coffee and stare at the window and wait. Then I'd come back and Emery would be awake, but having a hard morning. And I'd sit on their couch for 45 minutes while Adeline hovered in the kitchen, pretending to load the dishwasher, and Theo answered emails on his phone. And Emery would crawl into my lap and ask me to read her the book about the rabbit who lost his hat. And Adeline would say, "She's getting overstimulated, Harlan." And I'd put the book down. I'm not a complicated man. I notice things. I just take a while to admit what I'm noticing. Then came the requests. Could I please not bring sweets, even the cookies, because Emery was on a Whole Foods protocol? Could I please not park in the driveway because the neighbor across the street had complained about the angle? Could I please call before I came, even on the days I'd already called, because there'd been scheduling shifts? Could I please not post photos of Emery online, even on my own private Facebook page? or my church friends could see my grandbaby smile, because Adeline had a digital footprint plan. I said yes to all of it. I said yes because Theo would look at me from across the room with this expression I didn't recognize on my own son, this kind of pre-apologetic shrug, and I didn't want to make things harder for him. I told myself a marriage is a marriage. I told myself Marlene would have said, let it go. I'm not sure she would have. Then last September, 15 months after Marlene died, I drove up for what was supposed to be Emery's 4th birthday party. I had a small wrapped gift in my passenger seat. A wooden train set, the kind with magnets that I'd ordered from a toy shop in Asheville so it would feel local. I got to their house at 2 in the afternoon, the time I'd been told. There were no cars in the driveway. There were no balloons on the door. I rang the bell. Adeline answered in workout clothes. She looked surprised to see me. She said, "Oh, Harlan, I thought Theo told you he moved it to next weekend." He hadn't. I checked my phone right there on the porch. He hadn't. She said, "There must have been a miscommunication. I'm sorry you drove all this way." I asked if Emery was home. She said Emery was at a friend's house. I asked if I could leave the gift. She said, of course, and held out her hand for it. I gave her the wooden train set. I drove 3.5 hours back to Charlotte. I called Theo from a rest stop on I-85, and he answered on the 5th ring. He said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought she texted you. There was a thing with the venue." I said there was no venue. The party was at your house. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'll fix it. I'll get you up here next weekend." Next weekend never came. The party, I learned later, had happened that Saturday, the day I had been turned away. I didn't sleep much that week. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at Marlene's chair, and I thought about a thing she'd said to me once, years ago, when our neighbor's daughter had moved her father into a nursing home against his wishes. Marlene had said, "There are people in this world who will run a bulldozer through your life and call it landscaping." I hadn't thought about that line in maybe 15 years. The binder came in October. Theo invited me up for what he called a family planning conversation. He used those exact words on the phone, and I remember thinking they sounded like something Adeline had told him to say. I drove up on a Saturday morning. Emery was at gymnastics. The house smelled like a candle I didn't recognize. Adeline poured me a glass of water with cucumber slices in it and slid the navy blue binder across the kitchen island. She said, "Harlan, we wanted to get on the same page about Emery's care moving forward." I opened the binder. The first page was a mission statement. It described the kind of childhood Adeline and Theo wanted Emery to have. The words intentional and boundaried and developmentally curated appeared multiple times. Page 2 was a list of approved foods. Page 3 was a list of approved topics for conversation. Page 4 was a list of words and phrases I was not to use, which included pretty and be careful and when I was your age. Page 5 outlined visit logistics. Saturdays only, between 10 in the morning and noon. 2 hours, no exceptions. Saturdays only, between 10 in the morning and noon. 2 hours, no exceptions. Visits in their home, with at least one parent present at all times. Page 6 described pickup and drop-off protocols, except there were no pickups or drop-offs because I wasn't allowed to take Emery anywhere. Page 7 was the relative ranking system with my asterisk. Page 17 was the part that made me set my glass of cucumber water down very carefully on the coaster Adeline had provided. Page 17 described what Adeline called a family contribution structure. It said that given the costs of raising a child in the modern American economy and the hours of caregiving that grandparents could, in theory, provide but in their case did not, due to distance, it was reasonable for me to financially contribute to Emery's upbringing in a manner that reflected my role. It proposed a monthly amount of $900, transferred via Zelle to an account she would specify, characterized as a grandparent participation fee. The page noted that this fee would secure my continued and uninterrupted access to Emery on the schedule outlined above, and that the arrangement would be reviewed annually. There was a signature line at the bottom. There were 2 lines, actually. One for me and one for Theo as witness. I read it twice. I closed the binder. I looked at my son. Theo was looking at the kitchen island. His hands were flat on the counter, fingers spread, and I noticed for the first time that he looked older than I remembered him being. There was a gray patch in his beard I hadn't seen before. He had not made eye contact with me since I'd opened the binder. I said, "Theo, did you write this?" Adeline said, "We wrote it together." I said, "I asked Theo." Theo looked up. He said, "Dad, it's just, Adeline and I have been talking, and we feel like the way we've been doing this is working, and we needed something more structured." I said, $900 a month is structured. He said, "It's just a starting point." I told them I needed to think about it. I said it the way you say it when you've already decided and you don't want to say so yet. Adeline smiled her photograph smile and said she was glad I was being thoughtful about it. She said she'd email me a digital copy. I drove back to Charlotte in a kind of clean, cold silence I hadn't felt since the morning Marlene died. I'm not a man who cries easily. I cried somewhere around the South Carolina line, and then I stopped. And then I didn't cry again for a long time. A week later, I called a lawyer. His name was Devereaux Kane, and he'd been recommended to me by a friend from my church, a retired schoolteacher whose son had gone through a custody dispute the year before. She said Devereaux was steady. She said he was the kind of man who didn't rush, who listened first and talked second. I called his office on a Tuesday morning. His paralegal put me through within 40 minutes. I told him the whole thing. The $80,000, the cucumber water, the binder, the asterisk, the $900 a month. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked me 3 questions. He asked whether I had documentation of the $80,000. He asked whether my wife and I had filed a gift tax return on it, since the amount exceeded the annual exclusion at the time. And he asked whether I had any reason to believe my son knew where the money had ultimately gone. I told him I had the canceled check, somewhere in a folder in my home office. I told him Marlene and I had filed the gift tax return ourselves, with the help of our accountant. I told him I assumed the money had gone where I'd asked it to go, into the down payment on the Asheville house. He said, "Mr. Pickering, before our next conversation, I'd like you to talk to that accountant. Ask her to pull every record she has on that gift. Ask her to track, to whatever extent she's able, what happened to the funds after the transfer. She may need authorizations, she may not. We'll see what comes back. My accountant's name is Ophelia Marston. She's been doing my taxes since I was 41. She runs a small firm out of a converted bungalow on the edge of downtown Charlotte, and she keeps records the way some people keep gardens, patiently, year after year, the same plants in the same beds, every receipt and form and statement filed in the right place. I called her the same afternoon. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Harlan, come by tomorrow morning. Bring everything you have." I sat in her office for 2 hours the next day. She pulled up the original wire transfer records. She had copies of the closing documents from the Asheville house because Theo had emailed them to her at the time so she could help with the gift tax filing. She walked me through the timeline. The $80,000 had gone into Theo and Adeline's joint account on a Thursday in February of that year. The closing on the Asheville house had been the following Tuesday. $48,000 of the $80,000 had been applied to the down payment. That was what the closing statement showed. I asked her where the other $32,000 had gone. She said, "That's a good question." She made some calls over the next 2 weeks. She had me sign a form that authorized her to request additional records related to the transfer, on the grounds that the gift tax return I had filed needed to be reconciled against the ultimate disposition of the funds. I'm not entirely sure what every piece of paper said. I trusted her. She trusted the process. What she found, when the records came back, was this. About 4 months after the $80,000 had landed in Theo and Adeline's joint account, $26,000 of it had been transferred in 3 increments of just under $9,000 each into a separate account at a different bank, an account in Adeline's name only. Theo's name was not on it. The dates of the transfers corresponded to weeks during which Theo had been on business trips out of town. Ophelia showed me the dates. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "Harlan, I'm not a lawyer, but I would talk to your lawyer." I called Devereaux Kane that afternoon. He told me to come to his office on Monday and to bring everything. He told me not to say a word to Theo or Adeline about any of this. He told me to keep showing up to my Saturday 2-hour visits, to keep being polite, to keep playing the long game. I'm a patient man. I went to my visits. I sat on their couch. I read Emery the book about the rabbit, and Adeline let me because she had decided I was being thoughtful about her proposal. Emery climbed into my lap one Saturday and asked me why I looked tired. I told her I was just thinking. She asked me what I was thinking about. I said I was thinking about her grandmother and how much her grandmother had loved her. Emery said, I have a picture of her on my dresser. I asked her if she remembered her. Emery said, no, but Daddy says she was funny. I told her that was true. Daddy was right. Devereaux and Ophelia worked together for about 6 weeks. He drafted 2 documents. The first was a formal letter on his firm's letterhead, addressed to my son, requesting a meeting to discuss a financial matter relating to the $80,000 gift Marlene and I had made in February of the previous year, and providing notice that, pending the outcome of that meeting, I might pursue legal action to recharacterize the gift as a loan and seek partial repayment, given evidence that a portion of the funds had been redirected without my knowledge or consent. The letter did not mention Adeline by name. It didn't have to. It enclosed a financial summary Ophelia had prepared, with bank statements, dates, account numbers redacted in the appropriate places, and a clean line-by-line accounting of where the money had gone. The second document was a notice of intent to file for grandparent visitation rights under North Carolina General Statute Section 50 to 13.2a, which provides that a grandparent of a minor child whose parents are intact may, under certain limited circumstances, petition the court for visitation if visitation is being unreasonably denied. Devereaux explained that the standard in North Carolina was higher than in some states, that the courts here were generally reluctant to interfere in a marriage where both parents agreed on visitation restrictions. But he also explained that the existence of the binder, the explicit demand for monthly payment in exchange for access, would, in his professional opinion, be received very poorly by any judge. He said, "Judges don't like seeing a child used as a billing item, Mr. Pickering." I put both documents in a manila envelope. I sealed it. I drove to Asheville on a Saturday morning in late November, the first Saturday after Thanksgiving, and I parked on the street, the way I'd been asked to. I walked up the porch and rang the bell. Adeline answered. Behind her, I could see Theo on the living room couch, watching a football game with Emery curled against his side, half asleep. The Christmas decorations were already up. There was a wreath on the wall above the fireplace. Adeline said, "Hi, Harlan, you're early." I said I was. I said I'd brought something for Theo. I said it would only take a minute. She said, "Can it wait?" "He's having a moment with Emery." I said no, it couldn't wait. I asked her to get him. Something in my voice must have been different because she didn't argue. She turned and called his name. Theo got up, gently shifting Emery onto a pillow. He came to the door. He saw the envelope in my hand. He looked at me. I handed him the envelope. I said, "Theo, I want you to read this. I want you to read both documents inside. Take your time." He opened it on the porch. Adeline stood just behind his shoulder, the way she always stood, half in, half out of every room. He read the first page of the letter. His face changed. Not all at once. The way a window fogs up on a cold morning gradually from the bottom corner. He turned to the second page. He read Ophelia's financial summary. He looked at the dates of the transfers. I watched him calculate in real time where he had been on each of those dates. I watched him remember. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "It's a letter from my attorney and a financial accounting from my accountant. I need you to read both of them carefully, and then I think you and your wife need to have a conversation." Adeline said, "Harlan, I don't know what he's told you, but..." I said her name. Just once. I said it the way a man says the name of a bridge that he knows is about to come down. I said, "Adeline, the transfers are documented. The account is documented. All of it is in there." She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Theo, can we talk inside?" Theo was still looking at the second page. He said, "These dates, February, April, that's when I was in Boston for the conference, and San Diego, and the training in Austin." He looked at her. He said, "What is this account?" She said, "Theo." He said, "What is this account, Adeline?" She tried for about 90 seconds to explain. She said it was a household management account. She said it was money she'd been setting aside for emergencies. She said she'd been planning to tell him. She said the timing had just never been right. She said it was a misunderstanding. None of it landed, because Theo was holding a piece of paper that showed, in black ink, that $26,000 of the gift his father had given him for his daughter's home had been moved, in deliberate increments, into an account he had never been told about. He said, "Dad, come inside." I came inside. Emery was asleep on the couch. I sat at the kitchen table where I had once sat with my glass of cucumber water and Adeline's binder. Theo sat across from me. Adeline sat at the end of the table, between us. And I noticed for the first time that she had the same posture I'd seen in some of the people I'd had to deliver bad news to during my career. The people whose buildings, or bridges, or driveways I'd had to condemn. The posture of someone who is hearing for the first time that the structure they've been standing on isn't sound. We talked for almost 3 hours. I won't repeat most of it. It wasn't my conversation to remember. Theo asked questions and Adeline answered some of them and didn't answer others. At one point, she went upstairs and came back with her laptop and showed him the account. The balance was lower than it might have been. She had been spending out of it. Theo asked her what she'd been spending on. She said various things. He asked for specifics. She said she wanted a lawyer. I didn't say much. I'd said what I came to say. I sat at the table and drank a glass of water and watched my son's face go through every emotion I had ever felt in my own life, in approximately the order I had felt them, but compressed into one afternoon. Around 5 o'clock, Emery woke up on the couch and wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. She climbed into my lap. She said, "Grandpa Harlan, can we read the rabbit book?" I looked at Theo. Theo looked at me. He said, "Yeah, Dad, read her the rabbit book." I read her the rabbit book. I read her the rabbit book. What happened after that is mostly Theo's story, and I won't tell it here in detail because it isn't mine to tell. They separated in February. He kept the house. The $80,000 was eventually accounted for, mostly. The $26,000 was not fully recovered. Ophelia and Deborah both told me to let it go, that the cost of pursuing it would exceed what I'd get back, and that the symbolic value of having documented what happened was greater than the cash value of what could be returned. I agreed. Some things cost what they cost. Emery is 5 now. I see her every Saturday. Theo brings her to my house in Charlotte one weekend a month, and on the other weekends, I drive up to Asheville, and I take her to a state park near Theo's house, where there's a creek that runs through a stand of maple trees, and we walk along the bank, looking for what Emery calls good rocks. Marlene used to walk on a similar trail with me when we were first married, and she had a way of stopping every few feet to pick up a stone and turn it over in her hand. I never asked her what she was looking for. I think now she was just looking. I think Emery is too. I'm going to tell you something I've been thinking about for a year now, and then I'll stop. What happened to me has a name, and the name is financial coercion. It's an old kind of cruelty, dressed up in modern language. You give a person a piece of paper that says boundary, or structure, or participation, and you make their access to a child contingent on their compliance, and you charge them a monthly fee for the privilege of loving someone they were already going to love for free. And the person on the receiving end, if they are a polite person, a person who doesn't want to fight, a person who was raised to keep the peace, will absorb a great deal of it before they understand what's happening to them. I absorbed it for 15 months. I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling you. If you're a grandparent in this country and you are sitting in your kitchen reading rules off a laminated page, so you can sit on someone's couch for 2 hours and watch your grandchild pretend you aren't there, I want you to know that grandparents have legal rights in most states, including mine. The rights vary. They are narrower than they should be. But they exist, and a good family law attorney can tell you what they look like where you live. I didn't know any of this 2 years ago. I'm telling you now because nobody told me, and I wish someone had. If you are giving money to your children, for a house, for a wedding, for a medical bill, for a business, for whatever, document it, not because you don't trust them, because documentation protects everyone. A simple letter that says, "This is a gift of X dollars on Y date, given for the purpose of Z, signed and dated by both parties," will save you grief later if the relationship changes. I learned this the hard way. It cost me $32,000 and a great deal of sleep. And if you are watching someone in your family being slowly walked out of the picture, a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, a friend, anybody, say something, not loudly, not in a way that starts a fight, just quietly, to the person being walked out. Because they often can't see it from where they're standing. They're too busy following the rules. Last Tuesday, Emery called me from the back of Theo's car on speakerphone. She said, "Grandpa Harlan, I lost a tooth at school today, and the nurse gave me a little box for it. I asked her if it had hurt. She said no. It had been wiggly for 3 weeks, and she had finally just pulled it. I asked if she was excited about the tooth fairy. She said yes, but also that she had decided to keep the tooth because it was hers. I told her that was a very good decision. She asked me if Grandma Marlene had ever lost a tooth. Theo laughed in the front seat. I told her yes, Grandma Marlene had lost a lot of teeth and had kept track of every one of them in a little dish on her dresser when she was a little girl. I made that up. I don't know if Marlene kept her teeth, but it sounded like something she would have done. I have a picture of Marlene and Emery taped to my refrigerator. I have a picture of just Emery last Christmas, missing one of her bottom teeth and grinning, taped right next to it. There is space on the refrigerator for more pictures. I'm planning to fill it. I've had a year now to sit with what happened in that Asheville kitchen, and I want to tell you what I've come to believe, because I think it matters. Nothing about what Adeline did was an accident. People don't slide a navy blue binder across a counter on a Saturday morning by mistake. They build it, page by page over months, after 100 small tests of how much you'll absorb without pushing back. Every no sweets I swallowed. Every porch I stood on for 4 minutes. Every Saturday I drove home with a wrapped gift still in my passenger seat. Each one of those was a measurement she was taking. And the thing she was measuring was whether I would keep paying the price of being polite. I did, for 15 months. That's the cause. The binder, the $900, the asterisk next to my name. Those were the effects. I made them possible by being quiet. I don't say that to punish myself. I say it because I think we don't talk honestly enough about what kindness costs when it isn't paired with backbone. I was raised to believe that a good man keeps the peace, that you don't make a scene, that you give your children space. All of that is true up to a point. The point is the moment when keeping the peace stops protecting your family and starts dismantling it. I missed that point by more than a year. I won't miss it again. What I want any grandfather watching this to understand is that being decent and being passive are not the same thing. Marlene used to tell me that the strongest thing a man can do is stay calm while he tells the truth. I didn't fully understand that until I was sitting across from my son with a manila envelope on the table between us. I wasn't angry. I wasn't loud, but I had spent 6 weeks gathering every document, every date, every transfer, and I was holding the truth in my hand, organized and signed and notarized. That is what nerve looks like when it's done right. It isn't a raised voice. It's preparation. The wisdom part is harder and slower. I had to admit that I'd been wrong about my own son for a long time. Wrong about who he had become inside that marriage. Wrong about how much of my $80,000 had been used the way I'd intended. Admitting that hurt more than the money did, but I couldn't help Theo until I stopped protecting myself from what I already half knew. Emery is going to grow up watching me. She'll watch how her grandfather handled the worst year of his life. I want her to remember that I didn't yell. I want her to remember that I didn't yell. I want her to remember that I didn't quit either. Somewhere between those two things, the quiet and the quitting, there's a third option, and that's where character actually lives. That's the option I want her to know exists when her own moment comes.